Is Christianity nothing more than a fairy tale? Many skeptics would say that the Christian faith is just a fanciful story that makes people feel good, that there's no real evidential basis for Christianity. But is that true? I'm joined today by Dr. Gavin Ortlund, who is a Christian scholar and a pastor, to help unpack this issue. Gavin, in previous episodes, we've been talking about questions that you like to ask, that as we answer those questions, it points to the credibility and the validity of the Christian faith. And one of those questions is, could it all just be a fairy tale? So how does that question actually point us to the credibility of Christianity?
Well, one of my favorite scenes in the Chronicles of Narnia is in the book, The Silver Chair. And I'm reading these stories to my son right now, so they're very much on my mind. But there's a character there named Puddle Glom, who's kind of a pessimistic character. And he and several others are trapped underground. And there's a evil sorceress who's trying to convince them that there is no such thing as the overworld, that is, above ground. And she's casting a spell on them and trying to get them to believe that, and they start to give in. And Puddle Glom pauses and says, just one objection to this. Let's suppose that all of that is true. Then it means that the world that we've made up is a good deal more important and more beautiful than the real world. And that therefore he says, I'm for that world, even if it isn't real. And then he leaves. And I always appreciate that appeal, because I think it gets at another intuition that is in the human heart. Why do we find fairy tales so beautiful? Why is there a longing? I mean, suppose a naturalistic worldview is the account of things. In that scenario, when I study the life of Jesus, I'm just gripped by his personality. He is compelling to me. I think there's actually a great historical case to be made for the resurrection. And when I think about the gospel narrative and just the person of Jesus, I feel a little bit like Puddle Glom. If I'm comparing that to, let's just say Jesus was just an ordinary human being and nihilism is true and there's no heaven, nothing beyond nature. I feel a little bit like Puddle Glom, like these ideas that are now in my mind are more weighty and more beautiful than the real world. Just to take the resurrection of Christ as an example, that's a doctrine that I've studied a little bit, not just in terms of apologetics, which I think there can be a real case made there, but also just in terms of what it entails for the Christian life. When Paul says we're raised with Christ, I believe that means something incredibly beautiful and valuable. And I've studied the resurrection and thought about, this is a different kind of resurrection than Lazarus being raised again as Jesus does, or Elijah in 1 Kings 17 raising the widow's son, because those people died again. It was more like a resuscitation. They're called back from death, then they have to die again. Jesus rose again, and he will never die again. He rose to a new kind of life. And theologians call his resurrection body kind of like the prototype of heaven, or the first fruits of what's coming, what all believers will enjoy and what will spread to all of creation, this new kind of reality, this indestructible, glorious, heavenly kind of reality. And as I have studied that, I've had moments where I feel this intuition that if this isn't true, it's so beautiful. Why would it come about? Why do we wish it to be true so desperately? Another doctrine would be the doctrine of heaven, which I've spent time studying, and that was related to my dissertation. And one of the reasons I chose to study that is because I find it such a happy thing to think about. It's just such a beautiful thought that after 10 billion years, the best days are still to come, and it will never, ever end. And that the ultimate destination of a human being who is reconciled to the Creator God is never-ending, ever-increasing joy. That's a pretty powerful idea. And I feel like Puddle Glom a little bit. If that's not true, it's more weighty and more powerful than... And so the question is, why would these ideas come about? And, why do they have such an appeal to the heart? Mm-hmm. And this is C.S. Lewis's argument from Desire. If there is nothing beyond nature, why did it come about that there is this deep-seated longing for worship, for permanent happiness, for a deep sense of transcendent forgiveness? Where did these desires come from? The animals don't feel these desires. Where did they come from? It would be very strange if a universe that ultimately has no meaning were to produce creatures like us that are so interested in meaning. And I think that's one more clue to the credibility of the Christian faith.